Well, hello there, guys. This is going to be a little break from our regular programming. I thought I'd kick off a little series just to give some sort of tips and tricks to maybe some of you who might be thinking about buying one of these things, or an old car in general, really, but more specifically, why you might want to go for a Beetle and what you might want to look out for if you are looking at buying a Beetle. So this first episode, I'm going to focus on the dreaded tin worm rust. Okay, that's something that kind of comes up anytime you talk about old cars. So, thinking about buying a Beetle, something you might hear from a lot of guys is old VWs, oh, they rust. Is it true? Well, yes. All Beetles rust, okay? And this one behind me is no exception. It's a fact of life, they do rust. They're old cars. This one, even though it's a fairly late Beetle, it's going to be 50 years old next year. So all VWs do rust, that's a fact. But the caveat to that is, all old cars rust. It doesn't matter if they're a VW or not. I don't think you'll find many cars that are 50 years old that don't have a propensity to rust. And that's when you sort of have to think about some of the other cars that were around at this time. Say for example in 1972, equivalent to a Beetle, maybe something that was on sale in this country, you might be thinking about a classic Mini. Again, they have a similar cult following that the Beetle does. They were a similar price point when new, I suppose. This was a cheap car back in 72. Old Minis, they rust like nobody's business. Completely rotten, most of them. And they're actually a damn sight harder to sort than a Beetle is. So that's something to bear in mind. Yeah, Beetles do rust. All old cars rust. It's something that you're going to have to deal with, full stop. But the question you should be asking yourself is, how easy is it going to be to deal with that rust? And that's actually where the Beetle is quite strong. It's an unusual design for a car. It's got a very flat floor, and most of the wings and things like that are just bolted onto the outside. So as a result of that, and also it's suspension, that means it doesn't have many sort of uprights. It's got torsion bar suspension. There aren't many sort of the usual nooks and crannies for moisture and water and puddles and things to hide away in, which is what causes rot to start and what kills most of these old cars. So in that regard, you'll find that actually a lot of Beetles don't rust nearly as badly as some of the old cars around at the same time. Also, it's a German car, and Germans didn't get that reputation for nothing. So they were well built at the time, and they were designed in such a way that they weren't actually particularly prone to rot for the time, okay? That doesn't mean that they're not prone to rot at all. I will say it again and again, yes, they do rust, and yes, you do need to keep on top of it. But the point is, if you know what you're looking for, you can find a car where, some of the spots where rot might be a more terminal issue you can avoid, and some of the spots where rot will be easy to sort, you'll know what to look for and how to fix it. And I'll show you some of the spots that, they tend to go, and I'll sort of guide you through some of the ways you can go about treating it. Let's take a look around this car. As I say, it's a reasonably rusty example, although it does have some repairs done to it already. And I'll show you some of the bits to look out for if you're thinking about looking at a Beetle, and some of the sort of red flags that mean you should probably back away unless you're a particularly keen welder or you've got lots of skills, in which case you're probably not watching me. So let's go.
Okay, so we're starting at the front, and as you know by now, this is a 1200, which means it's a standard Beetle as opposed to a Super Beetle. Now, a Super Beetle was introduced in the early 70s as a means of effectively modifying the Beetle. It's sort of a last-ditch attempt to keep the Beetle up to date with some of the sort of more modern hatchbacks that were starting to come out around that time. Now, that is a consideration when it comes to looking at rust, because Super Beetles, unfortunately, are slightly more prone to rot than standard Beetles as a result of some of the design modifications they made. You can tell a Super Beetle because it's going to be quite a bit wider at the front and sort of more bulbous looking, and a lot of them have a curved sort of panoramic windscreen, garage door out of the way, as opposed to the flat windscreen that you find on standard Beetles. Now, I can show you, I do have a Haynes manual for a Super Beetle here. There you go, so this is one of the main differences. They introduced this McPherson strut suspension, which is a lot more sort of conventional, I suppose, for a car at the time. And yeah, it made the Super Beetle handle a little bit better. But because of this redesigned front arch and all of this upright, what it had the effect of doing was introducing a lot more kind of pockets for puddles and various bits of moisture, leaves and things to get trapped in there and just rot the wings out and rot these strut towers out. And that's something that you don't find on a standard Beetle. I'll show you the equivalent Haynes manual for a standard Beetle here. Just a torsion bar straight up across and none of that complexity there, which means that they don't rot quite as badly. Now, another difference are these bits here, and I'll show you on my car. So mine is a later Beetle, but it's a standard one, so it's a lower trim, so it doesn't have the cutouts for the vents here. So on later Beetles, they introduced sort of fresh air vents behind the back window here, and that meant you got fresh air for the rear passengers inside, which is, you know, a fine idea, and made it a little bit more comfortable back there. However, obviously underneath here is the engine compartment, so they wanted to keep this air here separate from the engine compartment air. So what they did was fill this area with sort of expanding foam, and that was probably quite short-sighted of them, because what that foam does, the air comes in here and that foam absorbs all of the moisture in the air, holds onto it, and eventually rots out this whole panel here. So that's very common on Super Beetles, and the only answer to it really is just to cut out this section and weld the unit in and get all the foam out while you're at it. So that's definitely something to look out for. Not such an issue on a standard Beetle or an earlier Beetle. An early Beetle won't even have this little scallop here, it's just be a flat panel, because I didn't even think about doing it at that stage. As you can see, mine has got a few bubbles of rust here. I think that's unrelated, that's just a general rot issue really. It's probably moisture getting in through here, which is another area to look for. These can get full of leaves and things, and yeah, you get rot around here. So that's where mine's going. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to save this if it's not too rotten, because I'd rather not have to cut out and weld anything that I don't need to. Really, that's kind of the main thing when dealing with rust. It's how much can you save and how much needs to be cut out and welded, because that's where all the effort comes in. Things like wings on any Beetle, Super or Standard, if these are rotten out or rotted through, you can just get rid of them and replace them. That's one of the advantages of a Beetle as opposed to you know, a similar car of the time, is that the wings just bolt on and off, and because they've been made for so long, or there were so many of them, spare wings are not hard to come by, and they're not particularly expensive either. so you can just replace them, and that's usually the easiest way. It's not usually, you know, especially if it's not a particularly rare model of Beetle, unless you've got like a really early one. Something like this one here, if these wings are rotted through, it's not worth saving them, it's not worth going to the effort. So yeah, similarly with bonnets, however, one thing to bear in mind with these, because of the shape, you need to be careful with the what kind of bonnet you're getting. Obviously there are lots of different bonnets for different years and different models, and you know, maybe I'll go into that in a future video, the differences between Beetles, because you can get quite geeky with that kind of stuff. But the point is, some of the reproduction bonnets don't quite fit properly, especially like this shut line here, because of the curve. So sometimes it is worth saving a bonnet, and I think that's hopefully what I'm going to do to mine, because it's quite rotten down at the bottom here. This, you know, it does fit quite well. I think it's the original part, so if I can keep it, I will, because changing a bonnet is possible that it's actually it's a bit more difficult. It's definitely a two-person job, and getting it lined up right is not ideal, so yeah, that's worth looking at. What other areas do they go? Well, down here, you can see where I've got some rust down here, this front valance. That's another particularly common area for them to rot out. And one place to check, if you're looking at buying a Beetle, let me just check this is unlocked, yep. Because behind here, on a standard Beetle that is, again Super Beetles are different, it's a spare wheel well. If I grab this spare wheel, I might have to put you down. So, take the spare wheel out, have a look down here, because quite often you'll find bits of detritus, but also water accumulates in here and rots this panel out. You can see mine has had some holes drilled in it, not by myself, but were there nonetheless, and that helps with the drainage. So that is a useful thing to do, because it, you know, might help prevent the rot. But I do still have some at the front here, so we'll see what we can do about that. So yeah, one of the most important places to look on a standard Beetle. You'll also see behind here the VIN plate. I don't know if I will bother blurring that out or not, but you can also tell from here the year it was made. So 112, I believe, is the model number. It should match with the one in the back, which I'll show you later. But yes, made in Germany, so this is a Wolfsburg, well, a German Beetle. I believe at this year it would have been made in Wolfsburg as opposed to one of their other factories. And yeah, I mean, you can tell from that some Beetles, obviously, well, Beetles are made across the world, so some of them may be Brazilian, Mexican. They were made in Australia for a while, various other places. Yeah, a little bit of Beetle history. Let's have a look at some of the other spots. Okay, so one thing I know I've spoken about previously is doors, and this is a good example of a door that is completely gone. So yeah, I may have explained it before, but this is what causes the issue. These window scrapers, they perish and split, and it's just not something that many people think about replacing. But what happens then is that rainwater gets down there, sits in the bottom of the door and just rots it out. So get this open. This is what you end up with. So always check the bottoms of the doors. They can be, I mean, like the lower panels of the outer door skin is not a very expensive part, but it is something you're going to have to weld, and consideration there is, what have you got left to weld to? Because a lot of these cars, because this is quite a common issue, a lot of them, and this one is no exception, this lower panel here is going to be mostly filler. You can see where the filler's actually cracked on mine. So yeah, filler's not going to be ideal to weld to. So that's a consideration. But doors are, you know, they can be replaced on these, and as you know, I've got some replacements which will be going on in a few weeks' time. So yeah, obviously, if you don't want to go to that effort, look for one without this mess. Otherwise, stay tuned and I'll show you how to sort it. Or at least part of the way, because you know, if you needed any confirmation that this is an issue on old Beetles, you can just look at these replacement ones here, because they are similarly rusty along the bottom, but they're not quite as bad, and there's quite a bit more metal there, which is why I think they would make ideal replacements. So another thing, well, an area that you should always look on any car really is underneath. So that's an area of the Beetle. I'll get you under here, which is another common one to go. So basically on a Beetle you've got kind of two floor pans, and the body kind of sits on top of them, and the floor pans are very, very flat. Now, you may have heard the cliche, or I guess urban legend, that if you put a Beetle on the water, it'll float because of the flat floor pan and the fact that it's sealed all the way around. And it is true to an extent. Well, certainly when they were new, it will float for a limited time, and then it will sink. This one definitely won't float anymore. Yeah, they were built with such kind of tight tolerances in those days. It was actually impossible when they were new to slam the door with the window up because of the air pressure. It would just bounce the door back open. So yeah, that should give you an idea. But floor pans, yes, they do rot. Some of the reasons for that is stuff like carpets. So originally they might have had some sort of foam underneath these carpets, which again holds on to moisture from your feet and so on, and that rots them out. Another important area to look is go behind the seat, behind the driver's seat, look underneath here. My kick panels come up, but otherwise have a look underneath the back seat. I'm not going to pull it out because it's a pain to get back in. Is the battery tray. And this is one of the most common areas for a Beetle to rust, is the battery tray, because obviously battery acid may slosh out, get onto the floor pan below, and then yeah, they just blow out. So definitely check that. Because it's so common, it's you can just get panels like for the battery tray, just replacement panels, and you literally just chop it out and weld the replacement back in there. Yeah, if you know what you're doing with a welder, it's not particularly difficult, or just get someone else to do it. You know, it shouldn't be too expensive really. So yeah, floor pans, they do rust, so always check them. Mine have been replaced, but fairly easily sorted. Something that's not so easily sorted is this area here, sort of between the sill and the actual floor pan. On a Beetle that's called the heater channels. So I don't know if I explained to you in a previous video, but essentially that's where the hot air comes from the engine compartment when you've got the heater turned on. It comes from the heat exchangers through these tubes here and out through these little vents on earlier Beetles, the vents were up there, but either way, they all have these heater channels and they rust very, very easily. Part of the reason being the hot air that travels through there comes into contact with sort of the cold outside of the car, the metal, and then it condenses and then you get loads of moisture in them and they just rot out. So mine have been replaced before I had it, and the previous owner left the heater cables disconnected so that the flaps to the heater channels would always be closed, and then that, in a sort of attempt to prevent that from happening again, that is quite a difficult job to do, and definitely something that you would consider going to a specialist for, but it is so common that it's always worth checking. So yeah, just open the doors on both sides. You can look underneath this carpet and just check that's not rotted out. You can look underneath here as well, underneath the running boards. You can get them under there. Sorry, yeah, so look underneath the running boards along these sills, because they will go as well. And that's sort of the most common areas to look out for on a Beetle, really. So yeah, as you can see, mine is you know, it's got a few scabs and things like that to sort out, but some of the most common areas like floor pans, heater channels and so on are pretty solid. So that's why I think we've got a winner here to work with. Another thing to look out for, obviously, is the actual frame itself that the floor pads bolt onto, and that obviously that's quite structural. So I know on mine, you can see back here, the actual frame head where the axle bolts onto, that rotted out, so that had to be replaced. And you know, things like that can bite you. It wasn't actually too expensive to get sorted, I don't think. But yeah, obviously I didn't bother doing it myself because I don't know how to weld. I would like to learn, but no space for a welder in here. So yeah, that should give you some idea anyway.
So yeah, that was just a quick look around a Beetle to show you some of the most common rust spots and what to look out for, and hopefully stop you from getting burnt and buying a completely wrecked one that's going to be too much work for you. The main takeaway I hope you get from it is that if you're looking at a classic car, don't let rust be the thing that will put you off buying a Beetle, because rust is something you have to deal with every classic car, and Beetles, they rust the same as any classic car, but they're not as bad as a lot of the cars from the time, and they're a lot easier to sort as well. If you know what you're looking for, you can find one that's pretty solid, and you shouldn't have too many troubles so long as you look after it, keep on top of any rust. Ideally, I would keep your Beetle under a garage or a cover or something like that, and not leave it out to the elements. Some people think that classic cars are there to be driven, which is true, and that to an extent, but I think what I'll do, I'll probably do another video another time on whether or not you should daily drive your Beetle or your air-cooled VW, because yeah, I did it for a long time, and it's something I have opinions about. Safe to say, yes, you can do it. No, I don't think it's a good idea, but we'll talk about that another time. So yeah, that was just a quick one. Yeah, a little break from the usual wrenching and stuff, but hopefully you got something out of it. And yeah, I might do some more stuff about buying a Beetle. Maybe some guides on the different types of models, different engines and that kind of thing. Stuff I can get really nerdy about. So yeah, cheers for watching. Give us a like and a subscribe while you're here. It'll really help me out. And yeah, I'll catch you next time. Cheers then, bye bye.